Welcome, little one, to another key evening.
Close your eyes, and let the northern sea wind whisper in your ear the tales that have slumbered for 1,000 years. Long, long ago, when the world was still veiled in deep, dense forests, and the sea was so vast that none dared to believe there was anything on the other side, there was a land called Fjordheim, nestled where the winds and waves of Scandinavia meet. There, a boy named Eirik was born in the heart of a bitter winter. His father was a blacksmith, his hands always stained with soot, and his mother was a weaver, her voice as gentle as the wind through the meadows. Eirik did not grow up to be a warrior. He was different from the other children in his village. He did not like holding an axe, nor was he interested in the strenuous training drills. He loved to sit alone, watching the waves crash upon the shore, listening to the stories of the elders, tales of gods, of long voyages, and of things no one dared speak of while the sun was high in the sky. Chapter 1: Oakwood and the Scent of Pine. Every morning, as mist still clung to the thatched roofs, Eirik would go to the old docks, where the longships, called drakkars, rested as silently as slumbering dragons. His grandfather, who had once rowed to lands far away, would often sit there, telling him stories. "We sailed far in the old days, Eirik," he would whisper, "past England, past France, even to the Mediterranean Sea. But not to raid, as the stories often claim. Some voyages were simply to discover how large the world outside truly was." He spoke of meeting merchants from Baghdad, of silver coins engraved with Arabic script, and of a time a storm swept them all the way to the icy lands of Iceland.
Chapter 2: The Festivalen the Longest Dream.
When spring arrived, the entire village would hold the Varblet festival, to thank the gods for letting the winter pass. During the ceremony, warriors would practice their drills, mothers would weave vibrant fabrics, and children would play sailing to sea. Eirik did not join in. He spent the whole time sitting on a rooftop, gazing at the sky. He dreamed that he too would sail away, not to fight battles, but to record all the beautiful things the Vikings had seen, a bay as green as jade, a cozy fishing village in Scotland, or the rolling green hills of Ireland. Chapter 3: The Stranger in the Village. One day, a strange ship docked at the harbor. On it was a tall man dressed in a black cloak. He carried no axe, but a leather satchel. Inside were maps, symbols, and pieces of bone carved with runes. He called himself Alrik, a keeper of memories, a kind of person of whom only a few remained in the world. Alrik said he was searching for an apprentice, not a warrior, but someone to tell the stories of history, someone to remember for a generation that was slowly forgetting. Chapter 4: The Chronicles of One Who Remembers. Eirik left the village with Alrik. They boarded their boat and journeyed throughout the Nordic lands. They visited ancient places, where rune stones stood in the middle of fields, where great warships were buried in tombs, and where the old still remembered lullabies in Old Norse. Every night, by the firelight, Alrik taught Eirik how to remember through rhythm, how to use symbols to preserve the feeling of an era. Eirik quietly carved onto pieces of wood and small figures, gradually becoming a skald, an epic poet, like so many Vikings before the time of written words. Chapter 5: The Fading and the Legacy. When Alrik passed away, Eirik was a quiet, contemplative man. He returned to his village of Fjordheim, now with only a few houses left. He opened a small room, filled with the hundreds of artifacts the two of them had collected. And every night, before bed, the children from the surrounding area would stop by. Eirik would tell them of gods no one worshipped anymore, of kings who had fallen asleep in the ice, and of the times Vikings sat quietly by the fire, listening to the waves tell stories about them. And now, as you breathe steadily in the quiet of the night, remember that history, whether of Vikings or of any other place, does not live only in books or museums. It lives in stories like this, whispered in your ear, as gentle as the night wind from the northern sea.
The Complete Story: The Land Where the Sea Wind Sing.
Excellent. Here is the full story of the land where the sea wind sings. The narration is gentle, the pace is slow, and it is designed to be relaxing, ideal for listening to as you prepare for sleep. Chapter 1: Oakwood and the Scent of Pine. Imagine a morning in that cold land, when the sunlight has just managed to pierce the thin veil of mist covering the thatched roofs. There are no sounds of car horns or alarm clocks, only the soft rustle of wine through the birch trees, and the gentle lapping of waves against the rugged rocky shore. Eirik, only 12 at the time, was awakened not by his mother's call, but by the cry of seagulls on the roof. It was the first spring after a long and unusually cold winter, a cold so bitter it had cracked the wooden doors and made the fire in the hearth feel, at times, not warm enough. Eirik lived in a small village called Fjordheim, a place nestled between a deep fjord and a dense oak forest. It was said the oaks here were as old as time itself, and that every trunk was a monument, a witness to the lives and the passing of countless Viking generations. Eirik's home was simple, made of pressed wood with moss covering the roof. There were no glass windows, only panels of animal hide to keep out the wind. But when the first light of day filtered through, the room glowed with a quiet beauty. The strings of seashells his mother had hung by the door, his father's old axe hanging from a beam, and the lingering scent of pine resin from the last time the roof was mended. Eirik did not hurry from his bed. He curled up for a moment longer, listening to the sounds of the world outside, the distant calls of fishermen, his mother starting the fire, and most importantly, the creak of wood from the docks. That was where his grandfather, Thormund, would go at first light. Eirik's grandfather had once been a helmsman on a drakkar, the long ship with a dragon's head, used to cross the seas centuries ago. He was old now, his eyes dim and his legs aching whenever the weather turned cold. But he still went to the docks, not to set sail, but to listen to what the wind remembers. That morning, Eirik tiptoed across the damp grass, following the worn path to the pier. The air was still crisp and cool. A thin layer of mist on the water's surface made the whole fjord look as if it were lost in a dream. And just as always, his grandfather was sitting there, on a log, wrapped in a thick cloak. Here to listen to stories again, he smiled, his voice deep and soft like old fur. Eirik nodded, sitting down beside him. The two of them said nothing for a long while. They just watched the water, where the light of the sky was spreading like diluted ink. Sometimes, on mornings like these, too many words would spoil the magic. Then his grandfather began, his gaze fixed on the horizon, not on Eirik. In the old days, my ship sailed west.
12 days on the open sea.
Every night, the stars appeared like thousands of silver nails hammered into the dome of the sky. Once, a whale followed us for 3 days straight. Perhaps it thought our ship was its kin. Eirik listened intently, his eyes sparkling. Though he had heard the tale many times, the images always felt new, as if his imagination were a lamp illuminating memories that were slowly gathering dust. A moment later, his grandfather pointed to an old ship moored nearby. It could no longer go to sea, its wood was peeling, its dragonhead missing a horn. That is Rafn, it means the raven. My ship. The Vikings believed ravens were guides for Odin, the All-Father. Whenever we didn't know where to go, I would watch the ravens. And strangely, they always flew towards land. Eirik asked softly, "Were you ever afraid? Sailing out, not knowing if you would return?" His grandfather chuckled, his eyes softening. "No, my boy. I fear the ones who never leave the shore. The sea can swallow a ship, but time swallows all that is not told." And so the morning passed, filled with the sound of the wind, the smell of salt, and the memory of a bygone era. When Eirik returned home, his heart was full, as if he were not just a boy, but a keeper of old tales, waiting for the day to tell them anew. Now, just lie still.
Close your eyes.
And let the wind from the land of Fjordheim whisper in your ear, that a boy once began a journey not with an axe or a sword, but with his memory and his heart. Chapter 2, The Festival and the Longest Dream. Spring in Fjordheim did not arrive in a hurry. The snow receded slowly, as if reluctant to leave the hillsides. But the villagers knew exactly when winter had truly ended, not by a calendar, but by a feeling. It was when the morning air carried the scent of wildflowers, and the birdsong was no longer as sparse as it had been on the cold winter days. And whenever spring came, the whole village prepared for the most important festival of the year, Varblet, the spring offering. It was more than a ritual. For the people of Fjordheim, Varblet was a chance for them to remind the gods that they were still alive, still grateful that the long winter had passed, and still hopeful for a peaceful year ahead. That morning, Eirik woke to the sound of cheerful laughter from the yard. The children had been out gathering wildflowers since dawn, weaving them into crowns to wear on their heads. His mother placed on the wooden table small cakes made of oatmeal and honey, a treat made only for this festival. The adults wore their thick hand-woven clothes, adorned with patterns of the tree of life, the sun, and coiled serpents, symbols of rebirth. The entire village gathered in the small square, where an ancient oak tree stood in the center like a silent witness to countless festivals. At the base of the tree was a flat stone altar, a place where the elders told ancient stories, and the young made their promises to the future. Eirik wore no armor, carried no axe like many of the other boys. He simply wore a wool scarf his mother had woven and carried a small, flat piece of wood, something he often used to carve the symbols he learned from his grandfather. When the festival drum began to beat, a deep, steady rhythm like a heartbeat, everyone fell silent. An old woman stepped forward. Her name was Solveig, the keeper of traditions and the village's remembrancer. Though her hair was as white as snow, her voice was still resonant, deep, and full of emotion. We offer the winter to the past, and we call the spring forth with our promises. Each of you think of something, not a wish, but something you will plant, something you will nurture in the year to come. Each person walked past the oak tree and placed a small item on the stone altar. Some placed a piece of wood with their name carved on it, some an animal bone to symbolize life, others a rare silver coin. Eirik quietly placed his own piece of wood on the stone, which he had been carving for several nights. On it was the image of a ship, but there were no men with weapons, only a single figure holding a quill. It was his dream, to travel far, to record, and to retell. No one laughed. No one called it strange. Because in Fjordheim, the festival wasn't about doing the right thing, it was about each person listening to the true voice within themselves. As evening fell, the villagers gathered around a large bonfire. They told stories, sang ancient songs, and shared a warm meal together. Against the pale purple sky, the smoke from the fire drew strange shapes, as if to remind them that all dreams, no matter how different, could fly high if one only believed in them. Eirik sat near the fire, beside his grandfather. He said nothing, only smiled when he saw the old man give a slight nod after seeing the carved wooden ship. One day, his grandfather said softly, they will tell your story, not with the edge of a sword but by the light of a flame. And now, as your eyes gently close in the soft imagined light, picture yourself sitting by that fire, among people who know how to love and respect what you dream of. The warmth spreads through your wool sweater, the smoke drifts through your hair, and in your heart there is a seed, waiting for the day to grow into a story. Chapter 3: The Stranger in the Village. Some days begin just like any other. The sky is gray, the clouds drift slowly, the call of a wild grouse echoes in the forest. But then from somewhere, a small thing happens, and that day is forever changed. On that day, it wasn't raining, but the ground was still damp. Eirik was sitting in his wooden house, holding a piece of flat wood he was in the middle of carving. He heard the unfamiliar sound of horses' hooves, not like the heavy, plodding packhorses of the villagers, but light, rhythmic, and fast, as if coming from a great distance. Less than a moment later, the entire village of Fjordheim stood silent, watching a man on horseback ride through the village gate, a black cloak, a hood pulled low over his head, and on his saddle, a large worn leather satchel. He had no weapon, no emblem of any tribe. He did not say much. He simply dismounted, placed the satchel by his feet, and looked towards the ancient oak tree in the village center, as if he had been here a very long time ago. The villagers were wary, but not afraid. The Vikings knew that sometimes, a stranger was not a threat, but a message from a forgotten road. Solveig, the keeper of ceremonies, was the first to approach and speak with him. After a brief conversation in Old Norse, she turned and announced, "His name is Alrik. He was once the apprentice of an ancient keeper of memories. Now he is searching for a new apprentice, a young person with a good memory and a listening heart, to pass on the stories that are on the verge of being lost." The news spread through the village like a gentle breeze across a meadow. The children were curious. The adults were skeptical. They were used to warriors, hunters, and blacksmiths, but a keeper of memories had all but vanished from this world. Eirik didn't know why his heart beat so fast when he heard Solveig's words. Perhaps it was because he still remembered his grandfather's stories, and deep down, he knew he had secretly wished that one day he wouldn't just be a listener, but would become the storyteller. That evening, sitting by the fire at home, Eirik asked his grandfather, "Do you think I could become someone like Alrik?" Thormund didn't answer right away. He took a sip of hot tea, then set the wooden cup down. A man with an axe remembers with his scars. A man with a pen remembers with his words. But both are fighting a battle, one to protect the body, the other to preserve the soul. If you feel the fire in your heart is meant for telling stories, then you already have your answer. The next morning, while the mist still lingered between the rooftops, Eirik walked to the small hut where Alrik was staying. He didn't say anything. He just sat. A while later, Alrik emerged. He looked at the boy, his eyes as deep as an autumn lake. "Have you come out of curiosity?" he asked, his voice low but gentle.
"No," Eirik replied softly.
"I've come because I don't want the stories to disappear." A moment of silence passed. Alric nodded. Good. Then walk with me for a while. Not to learn, but to remember. And so, Iric's journey began. Not with a grand farewell, not with a loud ceremony, but with a quiet nod, a single step away from the shore, and a heart that was burning softly for something that only those who wander far can understand. As you lie still in the gentle darkness of tonight, just imagine, there was once someone like you who sat by the sea, listening to the stories the waves told. And then he left that safe place, not to find victory, but to keep memory from being erased by time.
Chapter 4. The Chronicle of Wanwu Remembert.
When people think of history, they often imagine heavy books, dense with text, or cold stone statues in a square. But for Alric, the man the villagers called the keeper of memories, history did not live in books or stones, it lived in the breath of the storyteller. And so Eirik, the boy who used to sit quietly by the sea, left Fjordheim with Alric at the break of dawn. There were no farewell horns, no tearful goodbyes. Only the look of quiet reassurance in his grandfather's eyes, and his mother's hand placed upon his chest, as if holding on to something precious. The two of them set out on a path that wound along moss-covered mountains. The air was misty, the grass soft and wet beneath their feet. Alric was in no hurry. He said,
Walk slowly, so memory can keep pace.
They crossed birch forests, past cascading white waterfalls, and slept at night under makeshift shelters of pine branches. And every evening by the fire, Alric did not teach with words, but with images, sounds, and silence. Eirik, he said one moonlit night, can you hear the mountains? Eirik listened. He could only hear the crackling of the fire and the distant hoot of an owl. No. I only hear the wind. Alric smiled. Then you are hearing correctly. For the wind is the voice of all that no longer exists. One day, they came to a strange land, a place where rune stones stood tall in the middle of a field. On the stones were strange, winding symbols, so ancient that even the moss seemed hesitant to cover them. Alric placed his hand on a stone and closed his eyes. Then he spoke slowly, as if repeating a story told 100 winters ago. Here, 3 brothers swore an oath to the god Thor that they would never betray one another. But in the 7th year, one of them did not return from the war. Not because he was killed, but because his heart had chosen a peaceful life in another land. Their bond was not broken by betrayal, but because their dreams were no longer the same. Eirik was silent. He placed his own hand on the stone. A cool sensation spread through his fingertips, like touching time itself. He didn't need to write it down. The words, the images, they had settled inside him like a seed finding soil. And so, at every place they stopped, from coastal fishing villages where old men told tales while mending their nets, to mountain regions where descendants of ancient clans still kept fires burning in caves, Eirik learned something new. He learned to listen with his whole body. He learned to see with his imagination. And most importantly, he learned to remember not for the sake of storing, but for the sake of passing on. One day, Alric gave him a leather pouch. Inside were small, flat pieces of wood, each carved with a symbol, not letters, but images, feelings, memories. This is my collection of memories, he said. But now it is yours. I don't know what to do with it, Eirik whispered. You will. When the time comes. That night, lying by the dying embers of the fire, Eirik looked up at the sky. The stars were as bright as the carvings on an ancient stone. He felt he was no longer just a boy from Fjordheim. He was someone beginning to learn the oldest art known to humankind, the art of retelling. And now, take a deep breath. Just as Eirik once did under that northern sky. Let your imagination wander through the field of rune stones, and let your heart listen. Somewhere in this space, there are stories waiting for you to remember. Chapter 5. The Fading and the Legacy. Time, like the autumn wind gliding through the valleys of the north, passed silently, unstoppable. Eirik and Alric had walked together for more than 2 years. They were no longer just master and apprentice. They were like 2 generations walking side by side, one slowly receding into the past, the other quietly becoming the guardian of the future. The farther they went, the more silent Alric became. The stories he told grew shorter, slower. Sometimes it was just a look, a gentle gesture, or a fleeting smile when he heard a villager retell something he had heard long ago, and thought he had forgotten. One late autumn day, when golden leaves carpeted the forest path, Alric told Eirik to stop at a cliff overlooking the sea. There was a small stone bench there, covered in moss, that seemed to have existed long before the path itself. They sat there. No one spoke for a long time. The sea was calm. The wind carried the salty tang of the air and a chill that numbed the fingertips. Finally, Alric spoke, his voice as soft as if he were recounting a dream. "Eirik, you know, everything I remember will eventually fade away, if there is no one left to retell it." "But I will retell it," Eirik replied, without hesitation. Alric turned to look at him, a look of affection, mixed with a vague sadness that only those who have walked a full life's journey possess. "Then that is enough." Alric passed away that night. There were no cries. No grand funeral. Only an oil lamp that burned until dawn in the small hut by the sea. The wind did not howl, the sky did not rain, as if nature itself was holding its silence to honor the last storyteller. Eirik buried Alric under a solitary birch tree overlooking the sea. He erected a small stone slab, on which he carved not a name, but a single line of runes. He who would not let memories sleep. After that, Eirik returned to Fjordheim. The village was as it had always been. Thatched roofs, oak trees, the murmur of the sea. But one thing was different. Now, every evening, children would gather around Eirik's small house. They would sit in silence, their eyes bright, waiting to hear stories of a Viking king who traveled to the desert, of a mother who lost her child in a snowstorm, of a blind warrior who won a battle without a weapon, and of an apprentice who followed an old man in a black cloak across the Nordic lands. Eirik didn't use books. He used his voice, his eyes, and his hands to carve small pieces of wood, now numbering in the hundreds, hanging all over the walls of his house. Years passed. People from other villages began to travel to Fjordheim, not to see the fjord, but to listen to the stories. And every story began not with "once upon a time," but with, "I was told this by another, and now it is my turn to tell you." And when the night grew late, just like now, Eirik would often sit alone by a small fire. He would close his eyes, listening to the wind passing over his roof, the distant murmurs. Because somewhere in the breath of the night, perhaps Alric was still whispering tales no one had ever heard. A final whisper. And now, as you lie in the quiet darkness of the night, your eyes gently closing and your breath growing steady, know this. Eirik's story does not end. It continues, every time someone decides not to let a memory drift away. Every time someone like you listens with their heart and dreams with their soul. And because you have listened with all your heart, that story will live on. The end of the land where the sea wind sings. A gift for a soul in need of gentleness, and for dreams that need ships filled with memories.
Hello, and welcome. Tonight, we invite you to journey back to a time of long nights, bitter winds, and wooden halls warmed by fire and myth. A time when survival meant more than cleverness or strength, it required endurance. Tonight, we'll explore the everyday reality of life in the Viking world, beginning not with warriors or ships, but with something far more ordinary, and far more relentless. You'll soon find yourself in the slow rhythm of life in a Norse farming settlement, where the frost never sleeps. Later, we'll follow the dramatic exile of Erik the Red across ice-covered seas. We'll wander quietly through ancient burial mounds, and end our journey among the upper ranks of Viking society, those who feasted while others froze. But for now, settle in. Let your shoulders relax. Let your breath slow. Let your mind drift gently northward, toward a land of snow-covered fields, wooden fences, and the muffled sound of footsteps crunching through frozen earth. We begin with what it meant to survive a Viking winter, as a farmer. Segment 1, Why it sucked to be a Viking farmer in winter. Imagine yourself waking before dawn in a small timber house, the kind built not for comfort, but for necessity. The air is heavy and still, and the only warmth comes from the embers of last night's fire, now reduced to a soft glow beneath a blanket of ash. Your breath mists in the dim air. You do not rise quickly, there's no urgency, for nothing moves fast in the deep of winter, but eventually you swing your legs over the edge of the rough straw bedding. The floor is cold stone packed with dirt, and you step carefully. Even indoors, the chill finds your skin with ease. In this part of the world, the winter sun barely rises. The days are short, and the light, when it comes, is weak and watery, like pale milk poured thinly over the land. Outside, the fields lie dormant. The earth is frozen stiff, and beneath its surface, the hard-won crops of summer sleep inside storage pits or wooden barns. Your animals need attention first. The cows, restless and steaming in the dark, low-roofed byre, must be fed with the last of the stored hay. The sheep and goats huddle in pens. Their breath rises like smoke. They are your wealth. They are your food, your clothing, and your tax. You tend to them not with affection, but with diligence. Food is rationed. In the heart of winter, the meals grow simpler. A bowl of thin porridge, perhaps flavored with onion or dried fish. Flatbread, if there is grain to spare. Water, sometimes frozen in the buckets, must be broken with a wooden mallet. The tasks of the day are many, yet monotonous. Cutting more firewood, checking traps, mending broken tools. You do not waste energy. Every movement is measured, efficient. You move with the rhythm of necessity. The rhythm of survival. The wind outside is constant, low, and moaning. It seeps through the cracks in the walls. You stuff old wool or straw into the gaps, but it never really helps. You've learned to live inside your layers. You've learned to let the cold become something ordinary. There is no true solitude here. The longhouse is shared, by your kin, your animals, your tools. You eat, sleep, and live in a single shared space. Privacy is a luxury you've never imagined. But there is comfort, too, in the steady hum of familiar voices, the whisper of wind around the walls, the creak of timber as it adjusts to the cold. Evenings come early, and with them, darkness. The oil lamp is lit. A faint yellow light flickers against the rafters, casting slow-moving shadows on the beams. Someone tells a story, an old tale, repeated again and again, of gods, giants, and distant lands. It is not entertainment, but tradition. A memory of things bigger than this tiny room. And then the fire is banked, the furs pulled close. You close your eyes and try not to think of how long winter still remains. Because this, here, is not just survival. This is the entirety of your life for nearly half the year. And you are only in the first month. Segment 2, The Exile of Erik the Red, Fire, Ice, and Legacy. Now that we've settled into the quiet rhythms of Viking winter, we shift gently, further north, further back in time, and follow the footsteps of one man who refused the quiet life. His name was Erik Thorvaldsson. But you may know him better by the name history gave him, Erik the Red. Imagine a coastal village, somewhere along the jagged shores of Norway or later, Iceland. The wind here is stronger. The sea, closer. Salt is in the air, in the wool, in the food. And for Erik, trouble was not far behind. He was born into exile. His father, Thorvald, had been forced to leave Norway because of some killings, as the sagas put it. It was a soft phrase for a hard truth. Disputes in Viking society, especially over land or honor, often ended in blood. And with blood came consequences. Banishment, usually. The sword did not always kill, but it often displaced. So Erik and his family moved to Iceland, which, at the time, was still a rough frontier. Settlements were scattered, the law young and inconsistently enforced. The cold, as always, was ever present. As a young man, Erik began to farm. He married. He had children, one of whom, Leif, would become even more famous than his father. But Erik was also known for his temper. And in the isolated, honor-bound world of early Icelandic settlements, tempers had consequences. After another violent dispute, again over land, again ending in death, Erik was banished from Iceland for 3 years. Not simply asked to leave a town. Not advised to seek peace elsewhere. But officially outlawed, meaning anyone could kill him without legal penalty. And so, with a handful of loyal followers, Erik sailed west. Beyond the edge of the known world. Toward a place hinted at by earlier explorers. Toward something colder. Harder. And somehow, more promising. Greenland. It was not named for its color, at least not truthfully. Eric, understanding the power of words, is said to have called it Greenland to entice settlers. People will be more eager to go there, he said, if it has a good name. And so began the colonization of an icy land with an inviting name. Eric returned to Iceland after his exile and convinced others to follow him back. They crossed open ocean in ships no larger than modern buses, guided by stars and the memory of wind. Some were lost. Others made landfall. They built homes of turf and stone. They tried to plant barley. They hunted seals. They endured. Eric's colony in Greenland survived for generations, but never thrived. The land was too cold, too remote. Trade with Iceland was erratic. And when the climate began to cool further, during the period we now call the Little Ice Age, the settlements faded. Abandoned, swallowed by snow. But Eric's legacy endured. Not through conquest, but through curiosity. Through migration. Through the harsh, slow courage of people who took exile and turned it into exploration. And through his son, Leif Erikson, who would sail even farther, to a new land, which he called Vinland. But that, perhaps, is a tale for another night. For now, rest in the knowledge that even those who were cast out still shaped history. Even those who left not in glory, but in exile, carved their names into the cold stone of the past. Let us now drift from the man to the mysteries he left behind. The quiet burial mounds of his people await us. Segment 3, Secrets Beneath the Mounds, Viking Burial Mysteries. Now we turn from the lives of the living to the quiet presence of the dead. Across the old Viking world, from the windswept plains of Denmark to the hills of Sweden, from Iceland's volcanic soil to Norway's fjords, the land is dotted with subtle, grass-covered mounds. Some are barely noticeable. Others rise proudly above the fields, shaped like ships or long halls. These are graves. Silent vessels of memory. And they hold more than just bones. Imagine standing at the edge of one such mound. The air is still. The grass shifts lightly in the breeze. Birds cry in the distance, and beneath your feet lies a story, patiently waiting. Viking burial customs were not uniform. They varied across time and region, influenced by belief, wealth, and status. But they shared something essential, a reverence for the passage, for the crossing over, and for the continued presence of the dead among the living. Some people were cremated. Their ashes gathered into urns, or scattered into the wind. Others, especially the wealthy or powerful, were interred in ships, real ships, buried beneath earth and stone, as if the dead might need them to sail onward to the afterlife. Inside these burial ships, archaeologists have found carefully arranged objects, swords and shields, beads and brooches, tools and textiles. Horses. Dogs. Sometimes, even sacrificed servants, though the interpretation of such remains is still debated, softened now by scholarly uncertainty. What is clear, though, is the care. Imagine the interior of a ship burial, just before the earth was placed above it. A wooden vessel, fitted into a trench. A chieftain or noblewoman, dressed in finery, resting on furs. Around them, personal possessions, a comb, a weaving tool, a drinking horn. A symbol of the life they lived. Or the one they hoped to live again. The Gokstad ship in Norway is one of the most famous. Discovered in 1880, it contained the remains of a man, perhaps a warrior, perhaps a king. The ship itself was a marvel, fully built, seaworthy. It was not a symbolic vessel. It had sailed. It had lived. And then, it was offered to the earth. Another, the Oseberg ship, revealed a different kind of story, two women, buried together in extraordinary richness. Their chamber was filled with woven tapestries, carved sledges, and wooden animals. A spindle. A cart. The colors, now faded, once burned bright with blues and reds, yellows and greens. Even in death, they were surrounded by beauty. But not all burials were so grand. Many were simple, stones arranged in a boat shape, or a pit lined with wood. Children. Farmers. Craftspeople. The rhythm of their lives ended quietly, and the earth received them with no less respect. The mounds remind us of how the Vikings saw death, not as an ending, but as a journey. An ocean crossed. A hall entered. A fire lit in another world. And yet, even in their silence, these graves speak. They whisper of daily tasks and distant raids. Of stories told around hearths, and battles fought in misty fields. Of lives lived in rhythm with the seasons. Of hands that planted seed, forged metal, held children, drew swords. There is still so much we do not know. So many mounds unexcavated. So many secrets left undisturbed. And perhaps that is as it should be. We leave these places now, gently, and move to the halls of the living once more, not the farmer, not the exile, but the ones who ruled. The ones who feasted while others toiled. Let us now step into the longhouse of a Viking Jarl. Segment 4, Life of a Viking Jarl, Feasting, Raiding, and Rituals. Now, let the wind fade behind us as we approach a place of warmth, power, and ceremony. Imagine a large longhouse perched atop a low hill, its walls thick with timber and turf, its roof rising in a gentle slope. Smoke drifts from a central opening, curling lazily into the pale northern sky. This is not a farmer's hut. This is the hall of a Jarl, a Viking noble. A leader. A keeper of law and land. Inside, the air is warmer, richer. The scent of roasted meat mingles with burning pine and the tang of fermenting ale. Tapestries hang from the wooden beams. Carvings adorn the posts, dragons, serpents, and twisting runes. The floor is layered with woven mats and animal hides. Here, the rhythm of life follows different rules. The Jarl does not toil in the fields. Instead, he governs. He plans. He speaks law at the thing, the local assembly. He offers protection in return for loyalty. He receives tribute from his followers, meat, cloth, silver, and redistributes it during great feasts. Power, in this world, is not hoarded. It is shown. Tonight is a feast night. The tables are set with horn cups and wooden platters. Candles flicker. Dogs circle the edges, hoping for scraps. There is laughter, quiet and low. The Jarl's men, his herd, sit nearby. They are warriors, yes, but also companions, advisors, and witnesses to his rule. The food is hearty. Stewed lamb with root vegetables. Flatbread, soft and warm from the coals. Pickled fish, dried berries, curdled milk. A feast by their standards. Survival, but dressed as celebration. At the head of the hall, the Jarl raises his cup and speaks. Not loudly. Not boastfully. But with weight. A toast to the gods, to ancestors, to coming voyages. Then, perhaps, a story, of a raid long ago, of a foe outwitted, of a storm survived. And then the music begins. Simple stringed instruments. A rhythmic drum. Voices rising in old melodies that echo across generations. The past is not forgotten here. It is sung. But the life of a Jarl is not just feasting. Between the gatherings are long stretches of planning. Arranging marriages. Judging disputes. Preparing ships. Maintaining alliances. Raiding was not chaos, it was calculation. A raid meant months of preparation, negotiation, resource gathering. When spring returned and the sea lanes opened, the Jarl would call his ships. He might raid the coast of Britannia, or trade in the markets of the Rus. He might seek silver, or slaves, or stories to bring home. And he would return, if lucky, to his hall, richer and more respected. Rituals, too, were central. Offerings to the gods, Odin, Thor, Freya, were made with solemnity. A sacrificed animal. A carved idol. A quiet prayer whispered at the edge of a sacred grove. The Jarl's presence at such rites reinforced his role, not just as a political leader, but as a spiritual one. A bridge between the earthly and the divine. Despite the luxury, life here was still vulnerable. Disease, famine, betrayal, all were close. And though the walls were thick and the warriors loyal, no one lived far from winter's reach. And so, the Jarl too respected the rhythms of the land. He gave thanks at harvest. He lit fires in the dark. He looked to the sky not just for omens, but for reassurance, that the seasons, though harsh, would continue to turn. Now, as the fire in the longhouse dims, and the songs fade into quiet conversation, we find ourselves at the edge of the night. We've seen the frostbitten toil of the farmer, the fire-tempered path of the exile, the quiet reverence of the grave, and the structured power of the noble. And with that, we begin to leave this world of ice and iron behind. Segment 5, Reflections Beneath Northern Skies. And now, as our journey through the Viking world draws to a close, we rest once more beneath a darkened sky, quiet, still, and distant from the roar of oars or the clang of blades. You've walked the frozen paths of a humble farmer, feeling the cold settle in every joint and the silent stretch between labored breaths. You've sailed alongside Eric the Red, exile-turned-explorer, his vision of a green land forged in ice and necessity. You've stepped softly among the mounds of the dead, listening for the whispers of ship burials and stories buried with them. And you've warmed your hands near the hearth of a noble longhouse, where power was spoken in soft tones and legacy built in raiding seasons and ritual words. Though the Viking age is long past, though the longships rest now in museums and the sagas lie bound in parchment, their world still echoes. In the names of places. In the lines of old poems. In the steady rhythm of lives lived in tune with nature's silence and severity. But most of all, in the quiet truths of human experience, cold mornings. Small victories. Grief and celebration. The slow stretch of days in wintertime. And now, here in the stillness of your own evening, you may find comfort in the contrast. In the softness of your blanket, the hum of electricity, the warmth of still air. The world has changed. And yet, the need for rest, for stories, for stillness, that has always remained. Thank you for joining us tonight on this gentle walk through the far north. Sleep well. Dream softly. And let history keep watch, just beyond the edge of your dreams. Welcome. Tonight, we journey far from the modern world, across oceans, through jungles and time, to the Valley of Mexico, centuries before the arrival of Europeans. You are about to enter the heart of one of the most bustling, colorful, and misunderstood civilizations in history. The Aztec world was not merely temples and warriors, it was a world of vendors, smells, rituals, noise, markets, and memory. Beneath the bright sun, beneath the shadows of pyramids, daily life unfolded with careful rhythm. In this episode, we will gently walk through 4 moments in this remarkable world. First, we'll explore what it was like to sell, buy, and survive in the immense Aztec marketplace of Tlatelolco. We'll then follow the ambitious and tragic reign of Montezuma. From there, we will step softly into the solemn, sacred realm of ritual sacrifice. And finally, we'll ascend into the quiet privilege of the elite priesthood, where life was lived according to both calendar and ceremony. Let yourself slow down now. Breathe in, softly. Let the modern world fade for a while, replaced by the distant hum of bartering voices, the earthy scent of maize and spice, the gentle warmth of morning sun over stone and reed. Now imagine yourself in the market, long before it stirs. Let's begin. Segment 1, Why It Sucked to be a Vendor in Tlatelolco. Imagine waking in the gray hours before sunrise, inside a small home made of mud bricks and reeds. The floor is hard beneath you. The woven mat you slept on has left a crisscross pattern on your skin. Outside, the city of Tenochtitlan still slumbers beneath the stars. You are not wealthy. You are not noble. You are a vendor, one of thousands who depend on the great market of Tlatelolco to survive. You rise before the first bird calls. There is no breakfast. Perhaps a swallow of maize drink, barely warm. You gather your wares, woven baskets, clay pots, bundles of herbs, or perhaps a few ears of dried corn. Your goods are modest. You carry them yourself. The walk to the market is long, and already your shoulders ache. The stone causeways are crowded even at this hour. The air is damp, tinged with lakewater. Mist curls above the canals. By the time the sun rises, the market is already alive. The Tlatelolco marketplace is immense, larger, by some accounts, than anything in Europe at the time. Tens of thousands gather here. Buyers. Sellers. Officials. Children. Thieves. The noise grows throughout the day, a low, constant murmur punctuated by the sharp cries of hawkers. Each vendor must find space. There are sections for everything: fruit, tools, clothing, fish, flowers. You cannot simply choose a spot. There are rules. There are judges who walk the rows, ensuring order. Disputes are settled publicly. Punishments are swift and visible. You lay out your goods, careful not to overstep. Your hands are rough from years of this, bartering, arranging, hoping. Your eyes constantly move, watching both customers and the ever-present risk of theft. The air is thick with smells: sweet fruit, hot peppers, crushed flowers, dried meat, sweat. It is not unpleasant. Just overwhelming. Always something to notice. Always someone shouting. You speak carefully to customers. Too soft, and you're ignored. Too loud, and you're accused of disturbing the peace. You cannot afford to offend anyone, especially not the Kalmakak students, young nobles in training, who watch everything with curious, detached eyes. You trade, not with coin, but with cacao beans, with cotton cloth, with obsidian blades. Each item must be evaluated, compared, judged. And if you miscalculate, if you trade poorly, your family may go without tomorrow. There is no time to rest. The market never truly stills. And though you're surrounded by people, the work is solitary. Every sale matters. Every moment requires attention. The sun passes overhead, and the shade disappears. You drink water, warm from a gourd. You eat a small tamale, quickly, without ceremony. Evening comes slowly. The sounds soften. The crowds thin. You gather your unsold goods, tie them tightly, and begin the walk home. Your feet are sore. Your back, stiff. The day's earnings may be enough. Or they may not. But tomorrow, you will return again, because the market is your lifeline. And because, in a world ruled by calendars and gods, consistency is a form of survival. And so ends another day in the market at Tlatelolco. Segment 2, Montezuma's Rise and the Spanish Conquest. Now, we step away from the noise of the marketplace and ascend to a different place, quieter, but no less intense. The palace. The ceremonial heart of Tenochtitlan. Here, amid shaded gardens and finely painted walls, lived a man whose name would echo through centuries, Montezuma II. But before the conquest, before the stories of gold and betrayal, Montezuma was simply a priest, and a scholar. He was born into nobility, educated in the Kalmakak, the elite school for the sons of lords. There, he memorized long prayers, studied astronomy, practiced ritual, and learned how to lead not only with force but with structure. The Aztec world was complex, and Montezuma rose through it steadily, not through wild ambition, but through discipline. By the time he became emperor, or Huitzilopochtli, Montezuma had already been a high priest and military commander. He was respected for his wisdom and feared for his severity. His court became more formal than those before him. He expanded the empire, demanding tribute from more cities, more people, more lands. But with expansion came unease. The more he conquered, the more enemies he made. And the more he centralized power, the more distant he became, even from his own nobles. Imagine him now, standing on the temple steps, robes heavy with jade and feathers, staring across the lake from the heights of Tenochtitlan. He is not shouting orders. He is not laughing. His gaze is fixed. He believes himself chosen. And then, they came. Not in armies at first, but in ships. Strange men with metal skin and four-legged beasts. Spaniards. Led by Hernán Cortés. To the Aztecs, they seemed like something from a prophecy, perhaps even gods, though the truth of that is debated. What mattered was that they were unlike anything seen before. At first, Montezuma welcomed them. He offered gifts. Gold. Lodging. Guidance. He watched. He listened. He tried to understand. But the Spanish did not come to observe. They came to conquer. To claim. To convert. Tensions grew. Montezuma became a prisoner in his own palace. Some say he tried to negotiate, to keep order, to prevent war. Others say he was indecisive. Hesitant. Too spiritual for the moment. Eventually, the city turned on him. His people, once loyal, saw him as weak, or compromised. In the chaos of revolt, he was struck by a stone, thrown, it said, by his own subjects. He died soon after. A man of ritual and empire. Lost in a moment of contact that shattered worlds. But history is not a list of battles. It is a web of moments. Montezuma's story is not just one of conquest, it is one of belief. Of structure. Of a society that worked, until it didn't. Of a world that changed, not in an instant, but in a long unraveling. Tonight, we pause here, not in the flames, but in the quiet before them. Now, let us move from the rulers to the rituals, from the palace, to the pyramid. We will walk with reverence into the sacred world of Aztec sacrifice. Segment 3, Blood and Belief, Aztec Sacrificial Practices. The marketplace fades behind us. The palace doors close. Now, we ascend slowly, step by step, toward the temple. You can feel it before you see it, the presence. A quiet weight in the air. The smell of incense, copal, resinous and sweet, clings to the wind. The stones beneath your feet are warm from the sun, but their surfaces are worn smooth from centuries of passing feet. And ahead, rising above the city, is the Templo Mayor, the great twin pyramid of Tenochtitlan. This was not merely architecture. It was cosmology made stone. 2 shrines stood at the top, one to Huitzilopochtli, god of sun and war, the other to Tlaloc, god of rain and fertility. Opposites, yet inseparable. One demanded heat and blood, the other, water and prayer. The Aztecs believed that their gods required nourishment. Not metaphorically. Literally. The sun moved because it was fed. The rain fell because it was honored. The universe, they believed, ran not on inevitability, but on reciprocity. Sacrifice, then, was not cruelty. It was duty. The ceremonies were deeply structured. The calendar dictated dates, offerings, chants, attire. Priests fasted beforehand. Dancers rehearsed movements that echoed celestial rhythms. Musicians played drums that mimicked the heartbeat of the gods. Those chosen for sacrifice were not always captives. Some were volunteers, slaves bought for the purpose, or war captives treated with reverence. They were fed. Bathed. Given new clothes. Sometimes they danced. Sometimes they sang. They became a kind of living prayer, their fate known, their purpose clear. We do not linger on the sharpness of blades or the details of endings. That is not our purpose. Instead, we remain still and observe what surrounded the moment, the chanting, the rising smoke, the thousands gathered in solemn silence below. The city, still and listening. This was not done in secret. It was not shameful. It was central. In return, the Aztecs believed they were upholding balance. That they were keeping the fifth sun, their age, their epoch, alive. They looked up at the sky, not with fear, but with responsibility. They believed the world had ended 4 times before. And they believed it could end again. And so, sacrifice was protection. Offering. Communication. A way of speaking to the divine through action. There were other kinds of offerings, too. Paper banners soaked in blood. Spilled pulque, the fermented drink of maguey. Figurines buried beneath new temples. Children given to Tlaloc, their tears seen as echoes of coming rain. It is easy, from a modern perspective, to view these acts as alien. But step back, and see them in context. This was a culture with a sophisticated calendar, a vibrant economy, complex laws, poetry, astronomy, song. And within all of this, sacrifice was a thread that bound life to the sacred. As night falls over the temple, and the last embers of the incense fade, we step away quietly. We leave behind the mystery, the symbolism, the deep belief that sacrifice sustained the cosmos. And now, with the hush of ceremony still in our ears, we walk into a very different world. Let us enter the inner life of the priesthood, the elegant, the elite, those who lived not just among ritual, but above it. Segment 4, Priestly Luxury and Elite Rituals Inside the Temple. Now, let us leave behind the public spectacle, the chanting crowds, the steep stone steps, the solemn processions, and step into the quieter, more refined world of those who lived behind the scenes, the elite priesthood of the Aztec Empire. Imagine yourself walking through shaded courtyards, enclosed by high walls covered in painted murals, images of gods, stars, and sacred creatures. The noise of the city fades beyond the thick stone. Inside, it is cool and calm. The air carries the scent of burning herbs, dried flowers, and earth. This is where the priesthood lived. Not in grandeur as we might imagine a king's palace, but in a cultivated form of sacred seclusion. Their luxury was not ostentatious. It was ritualized. Intentional. Their daily lives revolved around duty, cleanliness, and cosmic alignment. Aztec priests rose before dawn. Their first act was purification, bathing, fasting, meditating. Their garments were simple, usually dyed black to symbolize their detachment from earthly pleasures. But they were made of fine cotton, woven tightly and embroidered with subtle symbols. Even simplicity here had elegance. Meals were light, often consisting of maize cakes and tamales without spice. The purpose was not enjoyment, but balance. Moderation. Their bodies were instruments of sacred duty, and like instruments, they required careful tuning. Each priest had a specific role. Some were astronomers, tracking the stars to ensure that rituals matched celestial movements. Others were scribes, recording myth and memory onto amati paper with charcoal ink and delicate brushes. Still others tended to the gods' images, cleaning them, adorning them with fresh feathers, flowers, and precious stones. The temples themselves were living things. They were cleaned daily. The altars, swept and decorated. Offerings were left in orderly rows, flowers, food, incense, tiny carved figurines. Nothing was random. Every gesture had meaning. Priests also taught. The Kalmakak school, reserved for the children of nobles, was housed within these sacred precincts. Students rose early, memorized chants, practiced calligraphy, and learned to speak well. Silence was valued as much as speech. Even their laughter was measured. This was a world of structure, and yet, of enormous responsibility. Priests were believed to serve not only the gods, but time itself. The Aztec calendar was a complex system of interlocking cycles. Days were named, counted, observed. Every ritual had to fall exactly where it belonged. A misstep could bring imbalance, drought, disaster. Imagine the pressure of maintaining the balance of the universe, not in grand gestures, but in small, daily acts, lighting the right fire. Saying the right word. At the right time. And yet, this world was not cold. Within the sacred order, there was beauty. Gardens grew inside the temple compounds, flowering shrubs, medicinal herbs, butterflies. Water flowed in narrow channels. Songbirds were kept in cages made of reed and gold. Music echoed softly through the courtyards. When night came, the priests stood atop the temple steps, gazing at the moon. They watched the stars move across the lake's reflection. They felt the presence of the gods not in thunder, but in silence. This, too, was power. Not the power of war, or wealth, or fear, but the power of attention. Of knowing the world through rhythm, reverence, and repetition. We leave them now, as they quietly chant beneath the stars, surrounded by the scent of burning copal and the steady heartbeat of their sacred world. Segment 5, The Murmur of Markets and the Silence of Stars. And so, we come to the end of our slow passage through the world of the Aztecs, not as warriors or legends, but as people. We began with the daily toil of a humble vendor in the sprawling market of Tlatelolco, where life was measured in cacao beans and aching feet. We ascended to the lofty palace, tracing the rise and fall of Montezuma, priest, ruler, prisoner of prophecy. We entered the sacred spaces where sacrifice was not horror, but offering, not cruelty, but continuity. And we stood quietly among the elite, watching the priests tend their fires, mark the stars, and guide the rhythm of a cosmos held together by ritual. What remains, as the world of the Aztecs fades from view, is not the violence that came after. Not the conquest. Not the destruction. But the structure. The intention. The way time was kept like breath, steady, repeating, sacred. You may find comfort, now, in contrast. In your own quiet room, far from the din of barter and smoke, there are no tribute demands. No stone steps to climb. No priestly duty. Just softness. Stillness. A breath drawn freely in a world no longer ruled by obsidian blades or lunar omens. And yet, something lingers, a respect for order, for rhythm, for meaning layered into daily life. Perhaps in this way, a small part of that distant world touches yours. Thank you for walking with us tonight. For listening. For wondering. May your dreams be calm. May your sleep be deep. And may history keep watch while you rest.